Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. US President Donald Trump on Wednesday recognized the disputed city of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and also started on a plan to move the embassy from Tel Aviv, overturning decades of US policy and sparking fears of fresh violence in the Middle East. Arabs and Muslims across the Middle East have condemned the move as incendiary in a volatile region, and Palestinians say Washington is abandoning its leading role as a peace mediator. The development is seen to leave India, friends with both Palestine and Israel, in a sort of diplomatic dilemma. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the implication of Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Joining me on the program today are Adnan M.A. Abualhayjaa, Ambassador, State of Palestine; Professor Pant, Head ORF Strategic Studies; Sheel Sharma, former diplomat; and K.V. Prasad, Associate Editor. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador Sharma, I'd like to begin with you and get a broader perspective of the issue that we are discussing today. What are the implications of Trump's move?
Well, going by the reaction of Trump's closest allies in Europe, reaction of China, and reaction in Middle East, a reaction of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So no one has actually supported him. And the reaction is very negative. Even in Europe, Tillerson, who was in Brussels, he received a very cold reception. And the European Foreign Affairs head, she was very categorical. So, and the butt of their argument is that, why did you do that? It was unnecessary. This is totally out of time, out of place. On the one hand, Trump talks about a Middle East peace, and he talked to the president of Palestine, Abbas, and he's been in touch with Netanyahu. And he's got some foreign policy team, his own White House fellows who are working on the Middle East. At the same time, if he does this, the negative reaction is overpowering. And so probably someone there has not actually advised him, or maybe he's doing it defiantly. The importance of Jerusalem is throughout this period from 1948 onwards, when Israel was created, that UN resolution said that Jerusalem will be special status. Then after that, 67 war, 242, and the spate of UN resolutions, each of them have maintained that the final status of Jerusalem will be subject to negotiations. But if you say that there is the capital of Israel, then what about Palestine? And this two-state solution, East Jerusalem has to be capital of Palestine, and then Israeli capital comes. But this way it is just, it's a force measure. So, and it knocks down all negotiation possibilities. And our friend, the ambassador of Palestine, is here. He can give the reaction of Palestine.
Sure, sure.
But I can say that apart from the Arabs, Jerusalem has an importance for the entire Islamic world, because the Prophet, peace be on him, was, he went to heaven from the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So, and in Islam you have Qibla. So before they started turning to Makkah in the initial years, they used to turn to Al-Aqsa Mosque for Qibla. So it is very important. It's the third most important place for Islam. Now, that's the reason why everyone kept Jerusalem with a special status.
Yes.
And this erodes that whole long-standing position.
Sure. Let me get the Palestinian ambassador's first comments and views on this entire particular issue. Ambassador, what are your thoughts?
First of all, thank you very much for receiving me in Rajya Sabha TV, and thanks to my colleagues in this interview. My thought, I think it won't change anything of reality, but it is violation at the international resolutions, right? And it is something against, let me say, the whole world leader decisions, especially as my colleague said, that Jerusalem, it's one of the last issues should be discussed, and East Jerusalem is part from the land which it has been occupied 1967. So why Mr. Trump, I mean, when we talk about the decision from the Congress, it's not new. It's from 1995. But none of the previous presidents of the United States has took that step because they knew the reaction of this step, right? And anyone who is looking for the two-state solution should look well to the situation and knows that Palestine or state of Palestine without East Jerusalem, it won't be exist and it won't be accepted.
Sure. Okay. You know, Professor, going by what the ambassador has just said, you know, I'm going to take a point that he has made forward. This particular issue has been going on for several decades now. None of the previous US presidents have actually done anything about it, but Trump has done it now after almost 7 decades. What has prompted it at this juncture?
Well, I think from his perspective, the answer is very clear. He made a campaign promise to his Republican Jewish base and evangelical voters, and I think he's coming. He is delivering on that promise. As he said, I'm delivering on the commitment that I made. So I think from his from a purely domestic political perspective, you can understand the decision that he has taken. I think, and as I think the ambassador pointed out, in America, it's also not such a partisan issue. I think we often forget that 1995, when the Jerusalem Act was legislated, since then it has continued to be a very bipartisan issue in America that Jerusalem should be recognized as the capital of Israel. Now, the issue has been that it has not been operationalized by successive administrations. Part of the reason has been that almost all administrations have been committed to a two-state solution. So in the move towards peace settlement, the argument has been that if you move towards that resolution, by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel would almost delegitimize America's role as a mediator as well as provoke passions in the region. And so from Bill Clinton, who also, by the way, campaigned on a similar promise but did not deliver on it.
Yes, did not go through with it.
Yes. So I think in that sense, what we are witnessing is a certain move towards the right in America, and an acknowledgement that these are important voters that needs to be taken care of. But the international situation, international strategy, Middle East strategy of America was always the foremost consideration in successive administrations. This administration has broken that rank and I think has taken a decision that it's worthwhile going through with this decision. And again, as has been pointed out, we are not clear how it will operationalize on the ground. Many people have pointed out it will be years before the embassy actually shifts to Jerusalem.
But CNN has spoken about a 6-month time frame to actually shift the embassy.
They're being very optimistic on it. And I think by and large, there is also, I think, this sense that ambassador pointed out that nothing substantive will change on the ground, but symbolically, much has shifted.
Sure.
Very significant ground has shifted today.
Sure. KV Prasad, let me bring you into the picture now. You know, the professor just said that it is Donald Trump following through on the poll promise that he made, but is it just merely a poll promise, or is there more to it than meets the eye?
Well, as of now, we don't see anything other than that right now, because is it a big diplomatic move? It just doesn't figure out with the way, because the way Trump administration, rather President Donald Trump, has been conducting the foreign policy has been a big issue of 1 or 2 odd things that he keeps doing, whether it was an attack in Syria or, you know, it's like there's no strategic thinking that seems to be behind this. Of course, as Professor Pant pointed out, his very strong evangelical support base, they're the ones who are there. And do not forget the American Congress, the American Jewish caucus in the Congress is one of the most strong and very strong lobby which has always worked it, and that's why that explains the 1995 resolution of the House. Having said that, there's one more ironical development that happened almost simultaneously after President Trump's announcement. He actually signed another waiver of the 1995 resolution, which of course was explained in technicality that if it was not done, the State Department funding for the continuation of the current embassy in Tel Aviv would have come down. And then simultaneously, Rex Tillerson announces that the plans to shift the embassy will be right away. So they're hiring architects and whatnot and kind of support to acquire land. And with Israel coming out in full support as it would do, I'm sure they'll try and speed up the process to see what you're talking of, the Syrian 6 months window that they're looking at could be quite feasible for them. But it doesn't explain in terms of the strategic, if you look around the Arab world around, the way Donald Trump tried to bring the Sunni alliance, this doesn't seem to fit that picture.
Sure. Ambassador, you know, taking the point that the journalist has just made forward, you know, as far as the Arab world is concerned, what does it mean for the peace process in the Middle East? Because of late, we've seen some kind of turbulence in the Middle East.
Well, you know, I also want to mention that the White House itself, having done this, they are also coy. So I see the reports that they tried to tell the embassy in Brussels to inform the Europeans that, look, it is without any prejudice to the final status, which is the main point of the whole thing, that the negotiations for the final status of Jerusalem, they will decide, and you cannot take any, you cannot preempt that. Then there was another story which said that the embassy in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, they told Israelis that this is going to happen, but please don't go to town with it. So that, you know, keep your... So they are conscious of the reaction, and they are anticipating a very massive reaction, which has happened.
Yeah.
So what will happen now in the Middle East is that they'll have to do a lot of damage limitation. Americans will have to do a lot of damage limitations. And how they will go about doing it, we have to see, because Tillerson's European appearance seems to be the first step in that direction, because he's also a bit coy about the whole thing. But if President Trump makes a few tweets which are, you know, along his line, then it will create a different kind of an impression in the Middle East. And you see, the Middle East is very emotionally very volatile. So these things go down to the street. The all Arab newspapers all over the Arab countries will carry this. So the man in the street will be affected with this. And the leaders have come, like even Saudi Arabia, with whom US has now been very close. Trump himself has, his first foreign visit was in Riyadh. But the Saudi king has come out with a reaction.
Yes.
So, and someone like China, for instance, which are generally very reticent, but even Chinese reaction has been that it will complicate the situation.
You know, Professor, you know, the Middle East has its own issues to deal with at this point in time. You know, we know what's happening with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and, you know, the UAE and Saudi Arabia are talking about forming their own new bloc now of late. So does this particular move, does this episode take away the attention from all the other problems in the Middle East?
No, I think in very significant ways, this will sort of feed on to a larger dynamic that is being played out. It is very interesting if you know, the biggest geopolitical fault line that we witness today in the Middle East is this you know, Saudi-led alliance versus Iran on the other side. So this Shia-Sunni schism that we have witnessed to, which has infected almost all parts of the region in West Asia. I think this episode perhaps what we are, Ambassador was talking about Saudi reaction. I'm a bit skeptical in terms of what it would mean later on operationally, because let us not forget that the Arab world largely has also ignored the issue of Palestine. They have not been, if you look at the states themselves, they have been, you know, they have been pursuing their own interests very vociferously. And so I think there is a talk of an emergence of a potential Saudi-Israeli-American axis vis-a-vis what they perceive to be an Iranian resurgence. And I think if that is the biggest fault line, then what might just happen is that this issue, while not impacting the elites, would really rile up the Arab street, the so-called Arab street. And I think that is where the problem lies, whether the capacity of the states in the region is enough to tamper that Arab street anger, which is going to be provoked by what the ambassador was just discussing in terms of public reaction to a very potentially very incendiary move by Washington. And that is what we need to be looking at. But I think at the elite level, most of the Arab states in the past have had covert or overt relationship with Israel. They have done it despite all the problems that it meant for the Palestinians. So I don't think that is going to change despite the short-term rhetoric that you might see.
Sure. You know, Ambassador, as far as the peace process for Israelis and Palestinians are concerned, does the announcement of Donald Trump hinder that particular peace process?
What was the last word?
You know, as far as Israelis and Palestinians are concerned, you know, what does it do for the peace process for the Israelis and the Palestinians?
Look, I think they have not been from the beginning as United States, who are the broker or the sponsor of the peace process. They have not, they were supporting the Israelis issue. Especially, we are negotiating with the Israelis since 1994 up to now, and they are negotiate just for negotiation. Every day they confiscate land, they build settlements, they jail people, they demolish houses, and the Israelis, also the quartet before, they have done nothing real to make a real pressure at the Israelis to go on with the peace process. We have done everything to make peace in the area. But I think the Israelis, they want the land and they want peace at the same time. Now our people are in the land. So we are looking now for different body to look after the peace process. Because I think the announcement of Mr. Trump yesterday has withdrawn the United States to be a sponsor of the peace process. Right? So we are looking for another body now, and we are looking to the reaction. We relay more than the Arab countries and other support from outside at our people. And the last 2 months, when they have tried to put those cameras in Al-Aqsa, I think you have seen the reaction of the Palestinian people in Jerusalem, right? So we rely on our people more than, but we are looking for the support from the whole world at the same time.
Okay, you're looking for support from the whole world is what you're suggesting. Yes, all right. And the support of the people also matters a lot to you. You know, KV Prasad, as far as security on the whole is concerned, what does this particular move by Donald Trump do for security in the region as a whole?
Well, I think it's always been a volatile region, and especially a move like this is going to spark some kind of, I mean, already there's talk of anger, and we've seen this before, just as His Excellency Ambassador was mentioning, when the metal detectors came up around the Alaska. You saw the kind of anger and how it generated into and eventually forced the security detectors and metal detectors to be moved away from the region. That's only one part of the story. I remember 2015, we were there when President Pranab Mukherjee was there. And at that point of time, there was a lot of anger on various issues, including the knifings that were going on and the kind of issues. You could see that the people were out there. There was always, at that point of time, people talked about whether it's one more intifada that was coming through. But then, of course, things changed differently. We don't know how it's going to pan out, but certainly the people's anger in that area. And already, if you've seen, the Americans have issued security concerns, both for its citizens, several. And tomorrow, I think the Security Council is also taking up the issue.
Sure. You know, let's take the discussion forward now and talk about India's role. You know, Ambassador, Palestine and Israel are both India's friends. You know, India has always supported both these countries. So does it leave India in a diplomatic dilemma?
No, actually, the reaction which has come out with the spokesman it's very forthright. They say that as far as India is concerned, its position about Palestine is determined in Delhi. It's determined independently, and that position remains. No third country can influence India's position on Palestine. I think that is a very clear indication of the kind of strong support they have for Palestine in India. And so that has, I think that statement shows that India is not going to, this is not going to impact on India's position.
Sure. Ambassador, what is it that you expect from India?
All good things. India have a good attitude supporting the Palestinian cause and the two-state solution. And in this matter itself, I have discussed it with some official at the MAA. And normally they have the same attitude, to say the truth, that we don't react in each event, right? It has same even during the Al-Aqsa problem. But maybe I will announce here, and no one before you knows, that Mr. Modi will visit Palestine.
Okay.
Right, and they told me this is the reaction. We consider it a reaction of what has happened.
Okay, so that's a headline that you're giving us, that the Prime Minister of India will be visiting Palestine.
Inshallah.
And thank you for that. Professor, how would you react to that?
Well, I think India has always balanced its relationships with Palestine and Israel. And not only that, I think a staple of Indian foreign policy in the region has been balancing three blocks, as if, you had Israel on the one hand, you had the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Arab states on the other, and Iran on the other hand. So I think this triangle, this triumvirate that India had to manage for has been a very tricky ride at times. But I think that is something that India hopes it can manage, and in particular within the case of Israel, Palestine issue, India has always tried to give this semblance of balance in its relationship. I think for Israel, and Israel for India is a strategic partner, has been a very important defense partner, and we can see the sort of growth in the relationship of the last few years, from back channel negotiations to very overtly display of affection by the prime ministers. I think to this historical sensitivities about the aspirations of the Palestinian people, which has continued despite the changes in government. So I think that has been a trajectory that successive Indian governments have followed. I think the real challenge may not be as much about Israel-Palestine, where India has been able to balance it relatively well. And as the ambassador said, if Prime Minister Modi visits Palestine in the coming months and years, I think it will only seal that possibility. But I think the real challenge will come, as I said earlier, the sort of geopolitical complex that is building up, where you are going to see this sort of relationship with a very resurgent, very aggressive Saudi foreign policy, aligning itself very closely with American and Israeli interests vis-a-vis the Iranian perceived threat. So I think that balance is probably more precarious than the one between Israelis and the Palestinians that India has relatively, I think, has been able to manage relatively well.
KV Prasad, let's talk about it from Israel's perspective. Now, news such as this would have big news in Israel, and the Israeli papers and everything else would have gone to town with it, but we've not seen that really happen in this particular case. Why do you think so?
No, I don't know. I just read a tweet by one of their foreign people saying that no matter what happens, the buffalo is in the water. So you can interpret it whichever way you want to. But the fact remains, of course, as Ambassador Sharma was mentioning, if the Americans have told Israelis not to build too much hype and go to town with the kind of announcements, it's but natural that the Israelis would like to heed, because for them, the decision has been made. And remember, this is slightly different from what Russia did. Russia, of course, recognized West Jerusalem. But in case of America, it just said Jerusalem, leaving open to the whole issue. That's why the whole thing opens up differently. And it's very surprising also to the fact that the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is supposed to have been working on a peace process. And what happens to that process that he was independently looking at. And there's reports which some American papers referred to this morning, suggesting that Sidney Adelson, who was probably Sheldon Adelson, who was one of the prime finance campaign raisers for President Trump, he is probably being signaled as one who has pushed Trump's decision in that direction. So we don't know. There's still many facets that's not very clear. But the fact remains, this has created a new kind of setup. At a time when America is battling the North Korea crisis, it's not yet settled many of its issues in other parts. So this is one more thing they've put on the table now.
Sure. quick closing comments from all my guests now, starting with you, Ambassador Sharma. Is the America just taking on too many things at the moment? You know, like KV Prasad just pointed out, you had the North Korea issue on one hand, you have so many other issues where the Americans are trying to settle at this point in time. Is Trump taking on too much?
It seems to be that American attitude towards diplomacy is not what it has traditionally been. They've been very careful, but the present dispensation is not sensitive to those concerns. So, like international opinion, President Trump has not much bothered about it. It is just in line with what he has done, like Paris Accord or like not certifying the Iran deal.
He seems to have a mind of his own.
He has a mind of his own, and as Professor Pant said, it is driven by his domestic constituency.
Sure. Professor, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, Ambassador has mentioned how several of the US allies have condemned the move. So, are we going to see a change of mind maybe as far as Trump is concerned?
Condemn. They have expressed a lot of
concern.
Yes.
Can we say that? Okay, they've expressed concern. Yes, they have several reservations. So, can we expect Trump to change his mind at some point in time as far as Jerusalem is concerned?
I would very much doubt that, because I think he also is someone who we know wants to project a sense of authority and command. So I don't think he would go down. I think what we might end up seeing is what was being discussed earlier, is that some plan that acknowledges in some way the aspirations of the Palestinian people. So I think going forward, while the ambassador here believes that America's role might be over, I might think that there might be a revival in the sense that America would like to play a leading role and would like to continue to play the role it has traditionally played. For that, it needs to make a very big offer to the Palestinians, and now that it has gone all the way to Israel. So I think that perhaps is the sense that that in the future we may end up seeing something of that kind, where they might be working on a big plan, which may or may not come out. But I think that is something that which may or may not work. But I think that's something clearly should be on the table if Trump wants to redeem the role that America has traditionally played in the region. Otherwise, Chinese and the Russians have already said they're willing to come in.
Sure. Is that what's going to eventually happen, Ambassador? The Chinese and the Russians going to take over from where the United States has left off in Palestine?
No one would change. It's not like that. I mean, we are not looking only for the Chinese and the Russian. We are looking for their opinion. We are looking for India. These great countries should be involved in the peace process and observe what's going on. Now, I would say, before I end that, again, I will say, nothing will change the reality. The decision won't give the Israelis the legitimacy, right? And we're struggling for 100 years. We will continue, and I'm sure that we will liberate our homeland.
Okay. K.V. Prasad, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I think this is one issue which, again, as I said, brings a total new dimension in the region and to the world. And let's see how it moves forward from here. But certainly, as one Western diplomat said once in a comment, he said, I would now not like to be a diplomat who is representing America, because every morning things change for the way President Trump tweets in the night.
Okay. All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.